The first thing you notice is the flash in your rearview mirror. Not the headlights of another car, not a reflection from a streetlight, but that sharp, unmistakable strobe of red and blue that seems to cut through everything else on the road. Your stomach tightens before your brain even fully processes what's happening. You weren't speeding that much, at least, you don't think you were. You glance at the speedometer anyway, as if it can somehow change the past few seconds. The police cruiser stays behind you, steady and patient, almost as if it has already decided how this moment is going to unfold. You signal, pull over, and suddenly the world outside your car feels quieter than it should. The officer steps out, calm, controlled, already observing more than you realize. And in that moment, a simple traffic stop is no longer just a routine interaction. It becomes a test of behavior, awareness, and sometimes even luck. Have you ever been pulled over and felt like the entire situation changed based on how you answered just one question or how you acted in those first few seconds? That question matters more than most people think. If you've experienced it, your answer should go in the comments, because what most drivers don't realize is that the difference between a minor warning and one of the most expensive traffic tickets in America often begins before the officer even reaches your window. And there's something important about that moment that almost nobody explains clearly. Something that can quietly turn a simple stop into a financial and legal disaster if you don't understand how it works. Most people think traffic tickets are just about breaking a rule, speeding a little over the limit, rolling through a stop sign, maybe forgetting a blinker. But in reality, the most expensive tickets in America are rarely about small mistakes. They are about context, escalation, and how those small mistakes are interpreted when the officer is standing right there, deciding what kind of situation they are dealing with. When people talk about expensive tickets, they often imagine a fixed fine, something like $100, maybe $200. But the reality is far more complicated. Some tickets can quietly turn into thousands of dollars once court fees, insurance increases, license penalties, and mandatory programs are added. And what makes it worse is that two drivers can commit the exact same violation and walk away with completely different financial consequences, depending on where it happened, who was driving, and how the stop unfolded. Take speeding, for example. Most drivers treat it casually, 5 over, 10 over, maybe a little more on a highway where everyone else is doing the same thing. But what many don't realize is that in certain zones, especially construction zones or school zones, that same behavior can multiply the fine dramatically. In some states, fines are doubled automatically. In others, there are mandatory court appearances, even for minor increases in speed. And the officer doesn't need dramatic proof. The radar reading alone is enough. Now think about the moment you're actually pulled over. The officer walks up, and before any ticket is written, they are already building a mental profile. They are watching your hands, your eye movement, the way you respond to basic questions. People underestimate this part completely. They think only the violation matters, but in reality, the behavior during the stop often influences how strictly the violation is enforced. If you seem overly nervous, if you avoid eye contact, if your answers are inconsistent, the officer may start asking more detailed questions. Not because you've done something worse, but because uncertainty changes the direction of the stop. And this is where things quietly become more expensive. One of the most financially damaging mistakes drivers make is talking too much. Not because talking is illegal, but because unnecessary explanations often introduce contradictions. A driver might say they were going 55 because they thought the limit was 60, then later say they weren't paying attention because they were focused on traffic. That inconsistency doesn't prove guilt, but it changes perception. And perception is often what determines whether you receive a basic citation or something more serious like reckless driving. Reckless driving is one of the most expensive traffic violations in the country, not just because of the fine, but because of everything attached to it. Insurance premiums can skyrocket for years. Some states treat it almost like a criminal offense, and it doesn't always require extreme behavior. In some cases, driving significantly over the speed limit in the wrong environment is enough. Now imagine a slightly different scenario. You're pulled over at night, the officer shines a flashlight into your car and notices something small but unusual. Maybe an odor, maybe an item on the seat, maybe just inconsistent behavior from the passenger. Suddenly, what started as a speeding stop shifts. The officer may ask you to step out of the vehicle. This is where many drivers panic internally and start making decisions that actually increase risk. Standing outside your car changes everything. Your body language becomes more visible. Your responses feel more scrutinized. and in that environment, even small misunderstandings can escalate. Officers are trained to look for changes in behavior, not just words. A sudden hesitation, a defensive tone, or an overly aggressive explanation can all shift the direction of the stop. One of the most misunderstood aspects of traffic stops is how much attention officers pay to passengers. Most drivers assume the interaction is only about them, but passengers can influence the entire situation. A passenger who interrupts, jokes nervously, or appears overly agitated can raise concerns. Not necessarily suspicion of wrongdoing, but concern about control of the situation inside the vehicle. That concern can sometimes lead to more detailed questioning, which again increases the chances of escalation. Now let's talk about another category that quietly produces some of the most expensive tickets in America: aggressive driving behaviors that fall just short of racing. Many people don't realize that street racing charges don't always require two cars or a clear competition. In some jurisdictions, accelerating rapidly alongside another vehicle or weaving aggressively through traffic can be interpreted as intent. And intent is what turns a moving violation into something far more serious. This is where drivers often misunderstand the system. They think the law is only about what actually happened, but in many cases it is also about how it is interpreted by the officer at that moment. Two drivers can perform similar actions, but the context, traffic density, road type, and officer perception all play a role in how the violation is categorized. And categorization matters more than most people realize. A standard speeding ticket might cost a few $100s, but the same behavior labeled as reckless driving or aggressive operation can multiply that cost many times over, especially after insurance adjustments kick in. One of the most expensive long-term consequences of traffic violations isn't the fine itself, it is insurance. A single serious ticket can follow a driver for years, increasing monthly premiums significantly. Over time, that becomes thousands of dollars in hidden cost that most people never calculate when they first see the flashing lights. Now here is something that almost nobody talks about clearly. Officers often ask the same questions repeatedly during a stop. Not because they didn't hear you, but because consistency matters. They are observing whether your answer changes under pressure. A simple question like, "Where are you headed?" or "How fast were you going?" can be asked multiple times in slightly different ways. And the goal is not to confuse you, but to observe stability in your responses. Many drivers make the mistake of changing their answer slightly each time, thinking they are clarifying. But to an officer, inconsistency can signal uncertainty or dishonesty, even when neither is true. And once that perception forms, the tone of the stop subtly changes. There is also the issue of documentation. When an officer holds your license and registration, they are not just verifying identity. They are processing information, sometimes running checks, sometimes taking notes. The length of that pause can feel uncomfortable, but it is part of the procedure. What matters more is how drivers react during that waiting period. Some become impatient, some repeatedly ask for updates, and others remain silent but visibly tense. Each reaction communicates something different. In high-value traffic violations, especially those involving excessive speed or dangerous conditions, that reaction can indirectly influence whether additional enforcement steps are taken. For example, a driver who appears calm and consistent may receive a straightforward citation. A driver who appears erratic or defensive may prompt further investigation. Another major category of expensive tickets comes from commercial driving violations. Even if someone is not a professional truck driver, certain vehicles or situations can fall under stricter regulations. Overweight vehicles, improper lane usage, or logbook violations for commercial operators can result in extremely high fines. These are not minor penalties. They are structured to enforce safety standards in industries where mistakes have large consequences. But even everyday drivers can stumble into similar financial outcomes without realizing it. Something as simple as ignoring a school bus stop arm or speeding in a designated school zone during active hours can create penalties that are significantly higher than standard tickets. These rules are enforced aggressively because the risk level is considered higher, and the legal system reflects that priority through heavier fines. What makes all of this more complicated is how quickly a simple stop can shift based on one small detail. A driver who initially seemed to be facing a basic speeding ticket might suddenly be dealing with a much more serious citation if the officer observes additional behavior that changes the context of the stop. And here is where experience matters. Officers are not just enforcing numbers on a screen. They are constantly evaluating risk. Is the driver aware of what they did? Is the situation controlled? Is there anything that suggests impairment, distraction, or intent? These questions are not always spoken aloud, but they shape decisions in real time. Drivers who understand this dynamic tend to handle stops differently. They speak less, listen more, and avoid unnecessary explanations. Not because they are hiding anything, but because they recognize that clarity often comes from simplicity, not over-explanation. Still, many people fall into the same trap. They try to justify everything immediately, thinking it will reduce the ticket. In reality, justification rarely changes the legal outcome of a clear violation. What it can change is the tone of the interaction, and sometimes that tone influences whether discretion is used. There is also a psychological element that most drivers never consider. Being pulled over creates stress, and stress affects communication. People forget details, misremember their speed, or speak faster than usual. Officers are trained to expect this, but they also interpret it in context. A calm, steady response often communicates more reliability than a highly detailed explanation that shifts under pressure. The most expensive traffic tickets in America are rarely the result of one dramatic mistake. They are usually the result of a small violation combined with a moment of poor judgment during the stop itself. Not criminal behavior, not intentional wrongdoing, just human reactions under stress that escalate the situation in ways drivers don't anticipate. And what makes it more important is that many of these outcomes are avoidable not by arguing, not by trying to outsmart the system, but by understanding how the system actually interprets behavior in real time. Because once those lights are behind you, the situation is no longer just about driving. It becomes about communication, perception, timing, and awareness in a moment where every small detail quietly matters more than most people realize.